Today is December 17th. It's the 352nd day of the year, and this is the On This Day podcast. On this day in 1903, the Wright Brothers make the first controlled, powered, heavier-than-air sustained flight with a pilot aboard at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, in a flying machine of their own making called the Wright Flyer. The Wright brothers, Wilbur and Orville, hail from Dayton, Ohio, where they manufacture bicycles. The Wright Cycle Company starts as a store and repair shop in 1892, and by 1896, they are making and selling their own brand of bicycle. Wilbur is the older of the two brothers. He's 4 years older than Orville. But they're as good as twins. They're inseparable, spending most every waking minute together, either at work in their shop, working across from each other on the same workbench, or at home where they live with their minister father and their younger sister Catherine. As interest in their bicycle business grows, they become increasingly more interested in flight. It's Wilbur who first actively pursues the idea, writing to the Smithsonian Institution for information on the research done in the field to date. But it is the brothers together who put in the long hours and hard work that leads up to their first powered and controlled flight on this day in 1903. And that hard work begins with a glider. When they design their first glider, they look for the most suitable location in the country to put it through its paces and give it a thorough testing. In 1900, Wilbur writes to the United States Weather Bureau and receives in return records from more than 100 weather stations across the country, detailing each locale's average wind velocities. They pore over the records and zero in on a remote location in North Carolina's Outer Banks, a large stretch of sandy land called Kitty Hawk. Orville and Wilbur make multiple trips to Kitty Hawk and nearby Kill Devil Hills over the next few years, first to test out their glider designs, and in 1903 to test out their flying machine. A few years earlier, they hire a mechanic named Charlie Taylor to help them in their cycle shop. Taylor is adept at building bike parts, coaster brakes, and the likes. He can hand tool most any part he needs. The brothers trust him to run the shop while they focus on their flying machine, but they also rely on his mechanical aptitude to help them build an engine for the Flyer. Taylor has some experience with engines. Well, he once tried to repair a gasoline engine on an automobile. Nonetheless, Taylor is given the task of building an engine from scratch, while the brothers focus their brains on how to make a propeller. 6 weeks later, Taylor has built a small 4-cylinder 8-horsepower engine that is light enough to mount on the airframe. When they fire it up in the shop, it rattles and smokes and cracks the engine block. A new engine block is ordered, and 2 months later, the now 12-horsepower engine sputters to life. While Taylor works on the engine, Orville and Wilbur develop a propeller, which is easier said than done. Without any existing data on air propellers, they have to create their own data. But that's a chicken or the egg scenario. As Orville notes, quote, "Nothing about a propeller or the medium in which it acts stands still for a moment. The thrust depends on the speed and the angle at which the blade strikes the air. The angle at which the blade strikes the air depends on the speed at which the propeller is turning, the speed the machine is traveling forward, and the speed at which the air is slipping backward. The slip of the air backward depends on the thrust exerted by the propeller and the amount of air acted upon. When any one of these change, it changes all the rest as they are interdependent on one another." The brothers work on the problem for several months, trying to figure out where to start, and then trying to figure out how to test a standing propeller to know how it will act in motion. They realize the only way they'll know if their propeller works is to try it on their flying machine. The first time they assemble all the parts that make up the flying machine is when they're down in Kitty Hawk. Their shop in Dayton is too small. They arrive in North Carolina in late September 1903, with their flyer carefully crated up for the train journey east. They build a hangar large enough to accommodate the flyer, assemble the machine, and then conduct a series of glider tests to fine-tune the flight controls. And they test the engine and the propellers. Their first proper powered test flight is delayed for several weeks due to excessive winds and a broken propeller shaft. Orville returns to Dayton at the end of November 1903 to supervise work on a new shaft. Wilbur holds down the fort in Kitty Hawk. The Wright brothers aren't the only people pursuing powered flight. A dozen other engineers and entrepreneurs in America and Europe are all vying to be the first in flight. While the Wright brothers are making preparations in Kitty Hawk in the fall of 1903, Samuel Langley of the Smithsonian Institution is conducting his own experiments on the banks of the Potomac. The Wright brothers are methodical in their approach. However, they too want to be the first into the air. So when Orville returns to Kitty Hawk with a new propeller shaft and news of Langley's latest failure on the Potomac, ending in a spectacular crash that nearly drowns his pilot, the brothers can't help but think that the finish line is in sight, that they may win this race. But slow and steady they go. They make the final adjustments to their flyer, and on December 14th, they flip a coin to see who will be the first to fly. Wilbur wins the coin toss and climbs aboard. But this first flight is not to be. He pulls too hard on the rudder and overcompensates to correct, planting the nose of the flyer in the sand. But it's not a failure as far as they're concerned. The only error was Wilbur's. The engine, the propellers, the launch track, all of it works. There's minor damage to the flyer that they repair over the next few days. On December 17th, the flyer is ready again, and conditions are favorable. They hoist a white bedsheet on the side of their hangar, a signal to the nearby life-saving station. 5 men from the station wander over to help carry the flyer down to the dunes. Among the men from the station is John T. Daniels, who has assisted the brothers in the past. He's tasked with clicking the shutter on a camera Orville positions 30 feet from the end of the track. And then they're ready. No need to flip a coin again. Wilbur went first the other day. Now it's Orville's turn. Orville Wright describes his historic first flight in his diary entry for this day in 1903, writing, quote, "After running the engine and propellers a few minutes to get them in working order, I got on the machine at 10:35 for the first trial. The wind at this time was blowing a little over 20 to 27 miles. On slipping the rope, the machine started off increasing in speed to probably 7 or 8 miles. The machine lifted from the track just as it was entering on the 4th rail. Mr. Daniels took a picture just as it left the tracks. I found the control of the front rudder quite difficult on account of it being balanced too near the center, and thus had a tendency to turn itself so that the rudder turned too far." This first flight that Orville describes as extremely erratic lasts for 12 seconds and covers a distance of 120 feet. It's Wilbur's turn next, 175 feet. Then Orville again, 200 feet. And around noon, Wilbur flies half a mile through the air, 852 feet over ground, in 59 seconds. Then they pack it in, have lunch, and send a telegram home with the news of their 4 flights this morning, the first powered and controlled flight in history, on this day in 1903. Author David McCullough sums up the day and the brothers' incredible achievement quite nicely in his fantastic book, The Wright Brothers. McCullough writes, quote, "It had taken 4 years. They had endured violent storms, accidents, one disappointment after another, public indifference or ridicule, and clouds of demon mosquitoes. To get to and from their remote sand dune testing ground, they had made 5 round trips from Dayton, counting Orville's return home to see about stronger propeller shafts, a total of 7,000 miles by train. All to fly little more than half a mile. No matter. They had done it." There are 14 days left in the year. On This Day is produced by me, Dave Schultz. Thank you very much for listening. Decades later, December 17th is chosen for many other first flights to pay homage to the Wright brothers. The first flight of the Douglas DC-3 in 1935, the Boeing B-47 Stratojet in 1947, the first Atlas intercontinental ballistic missile in 1957, and Spaceship One's maiden voyage on this day in 2003. So if you're still listening, you may now move about the cabin. Talk to you tomorrow.